Kabir stood frozen at the temple entrance, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The witch loomed before him, her eyeless sockets fixated on him, her lips curling into an unnatural grin. "You brought me nothing," she whispered, her voice slithering through the cold night air like a serpent. The wind howled around him, carrying with it the distant, haunting echoes of Meera's last screams. Kabir's fists clenched. He had come to end this, but now, faced with the very thing that had taken his wife from him, he realized he had no idea how. "What do you want from me?" Kabir demanded, his voice shaking. The witch tilted her head, her bony fingers twitching. Then, in a whisper that sent chills down his spine, she rasped, "Your hair, your soul, your sorrow. I take what I desire." Kabir took a step back, his heart hammering. She wouldn't stop, not until she had consumed every part of him. Kabir ran, stumbling down the uneven path leading away from the cursed temple. The moment he stepped past the broken archway, the eerie whispers ceased. The air returned to normal, but the weight of the night remained heavy on his chest. When he reached the resort, the caretaker was waiting for him at the entrance, his wrinkled face drawn with tired resignation. "She will not stop, Kabir," the old man said. "She has claimed you now." Kabir collapsed onto the porch steps, gripping his head in his hands. "What do I do? How do I stop her?" The caretaker hesitated, then spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "There is one way, but it is not easy." Kabir's eyes snapped up. "Tell me." The caretaker exhaled slowly. "Her curse is fueled by betrayal." She was a priestess, a protector of the temple, but the very people she blessed turned against her. They shaved her head, stripped her of her power, and burned her alive. Kabir shuddered. He had heard the story before, but now it carried an unbearable weight. "You must find her remains," the caretaker continued, "and return them to the temple. Only then will her soul be freed." A lump formed in Kabir's throat. "And if I don't?" The caretaker's expression darkened. "Then you will not survive the next full moon." The next morning, Kabir ventured into the village below the hills, seeking any information about the temple's dark past. The locals were hesitant to speak, their fear deeply ingrained. Finally, an elderly woman, draped in a faded sari, agreed to talk. "The priestess remains," she murmured, stirring a pot of boiling herbs over an open flame. "They were never buried. They were scattered." Kabir's stomach sank. Scattered. The old woman nodded. Her ashes were thrown into the Neela River, but her bones, those were taken by those who betrayed her. They feared her return, so they hid them, far from the temple. Kabir felt a cold sweat form on his brow. "Where?" The woman sighed. "Some say they are in the Cave of the Dead, a place where only the cursed dare to go." Armed with a flashlight, a thick rope, and a desperate will to survive, Kabir set off toward the cave, which lay deep within the dense jungle. As he stepped inside, an unnatural coldness enveloped him. The air smelled of damp earth and decay. His flashlight beam flickered against the jagged walls, revealing strange markings, symbols etched into the stone, long forgotten by time. Then he heard it, a faint, rhythmic chanting. His pulse quickened. Kabir ventured deeper, his breath shallow, until he saw it. A small altar, covered in dust and ash, and on it bones. They were yellowed with age, fragile, yet radiating something unnatural. Kabir reached out, but the moment his fingers brushed the remains, the ground trembled. A voice boomed through the cave. "Leave them." Kabir spun around, but there was no one there. Then, from the darkness, a figure emerged. A man, his eyes hollow, his skin stretched tight over his skull. "You should not have come," the man rasped. "She belongs to the past. If you take her, you take her wrath with you." Kabir ignored him, grabbing the bones and shoving them into a cloth bag. The man screamed, his voice splitting the air, and then the cave collapsed. Kabir barely escaped, tumbling down the slope, his body bruised and bleeding. The sky above had turned black, though the sun should have been high. And then she appeared, the witch, standing at the jungle's edge, her mouth twisted in rage. "You cannot undo what was done," she shrieked. Kabir ran. He ran as fast as his body would allow, clutching the bag to his chest. The resort was in sight. He just needed to reach the temple. But the witch was behind him. He could hear her nails scraping against the earth, hear her breath against his neck. The moment he crossed into the temple grounds, she screamed, a sound so inhuman. It felt as though the air itself tore apart. The caretaker was waiting. "Do it now," he shouted. Kabir didn't hesitate. He ran to the center of the temple, placed the bones on the ancient altar, and lit the ceremonial fire. The flames roared to life, illuminating the temple in a blinding golden light. The witch shrieked, her body twisted, her shadow contorting violently, until, at last, she collapsed into dust. The night fell silent. It was over. The curse was lifted. The temple, once shrouded in darkness, now stood silent and still. Kabir fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. Meera was gone, but at least so was the witch. Days later, the resort was permanently shut down, and the temple was sealed off. Kabir left Munnar, his heart heavy with grief. But even as he boarded his flight back to Mumbai, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The nightmares never truly stopped, and sometimes, in the dead of night, he still heard the wind whisper, "You brought me nothing."